At hour 4 of a 12-hour shift, somewhere on a single-track mainline in Nebraska, an engineer reaches for his water bottle and puts it back without drinking from it. He made this decision before he left the terminal, not to stop drinking, but to slow down. His conductor is doing the same thing on the other side of the cab. Neither of them has said anything about it. They do not need to. This is not a rule. It is not in any training manual. It is a habit that every experienced freight crew member develops, and it is the first thing this video is about. The second thing is the toilet bolted into the nose of the locomotive behind them, a compartment the size of a phone booth, legally required to be there since 2002 and practically usable only when the train is stopped. The third thing is why stopping is not an option most crews will take. And the fourth is what the Federal Railroad Administration found when it inspected 234 locomotives before any of this was regulated. Roughly 30% of them were deficient in some way related to sanitation. Dirty floors, missing toilet seats, systems frozen solid in winter, no toilet paper. Together, those four things explain a situation that most people outside the railroad industry have never thought about, and that most people inside it have simply accepted as the shape of the job. Here is where it starts. A loaded freight train at 55 miles per hour, carrying 10,000 tons, needs more than a mile of track to come to a controlled stop. That is not a complaint. That is physics. The braking system on a freight train works by reducing air pressure in the brake pipe that runs the length of the consist, a signal that propagates from car to car and applies brakes sequentially down the train. It works reliably, but it does not work quickly, and it cannot be made to work more quickly by wanting it to. The crew knows this before their first day in the cab. The distance required to stop a fully loaded freight train is one of the first things a trainee learns, and it shapes every other decision made during a shift. But the physics of stopping are only the beginning of the problem. A stationary train on a single-track mainline occupies that track. Other trains cannot pass. Dispatchers have to reroute or hold traffic behind the stopped consist while the situation is resolved. If the stopped train happens to be sitting across a public grade crossing, which a 2-mile train almost certainly is, given that grade crossings appear every mile or two on most freight corridors, emergency vehicles cannot cross. The network consequence of a single unplanned stop is not local. It spreads outward through every train behind the stopped one, every crew change those trains are supposed to meet, every customer window those trains are supposed to hit. A stop that solves one problem on one train creates a cascade of smaller problems across a regional rail network. Then there is the question of restarting. Before any crew member can step off the locomotive, the train must be secured against rolling. On a grade, that means applying handbrakes on a sufficient number of cars and venting the brake pipe. Reversing that process before departure takes time. Time that comes directly out of the crew's 12-hour federal duty clock. A stop that might feel like 10 minutes in a car is 45 minutes or more on a freight train, and the clock does not pause while it happens. This is the context in which experienced engineers and conductors make the decision about the water bottle. It is also the context in which the railroad industry operated for over a century without any federal requirement to address what happens when a crew member needs to use a toilet during a shift. The infrastructure for moving freight was regulated in extraordinary detail. Wheel dimensions, brake pipe pressures, signal systems, speed limits. The infrastructure for keeping the two people responsible for all of it comfortable enough to function was, until 2002, left to the discretion of individual railroads. The sanitation compartment on a modern freight locomotive sits in the nose, the short hood ahead of the cab, accessible through a door without stepping outside. It is roughly the size of a standard aircraft lavatory, which is to say it is not comfortable, but it is functional. The toilet is a self-contained unit, not connected to any external plumbing, using a chemical treatment system and manual or automatic pump-out. There is a washing system. There is a Modesty lock on the door. There is required to be toilet paper. These are not amenities. They are the minimum legal standard, codified in 49 CFR 229.137, which took effect on June 3, 2002, and which represents the first time in the history of American railroading that any of this was federally mandated. For the entire century plus before that rule, the structural integrity of the locomotive was regulated in exacting detail. The comfort of the people operating it was not. Before that date, there was no federal requirement for any of this. Some locomotives had toilets, some did not. Some had systems that worked, some had systems that froze in winter and stayed frozen. The Federal Railroad Administration surveyed 234 locomotives in the years leading up to the 2002 rule and found that approximately 30% were deficient in some manner related to sanitation. Dirty floors, missing toilet seats, inoperable ventilation, waste tanks frozen solid. The report did not find that these conditions were the result of design failures. It found they were primarily the result of inadequate maintenance by the railroads operating the equipment. The rule that followed was an attempt to establish a floor under which no locomotive in road service could legally fall. The floor has some unusual features. If the Modesty lock on the compartment door fails, the railroad has until the locomotive's next scheduled 92-day inspection to repair it. A defective toilet on a locomotive in switching or transfer service can remain in that condition for up to 10 calendar days before repair is required. A locomotive with a defective toilet can still be dispatched in road service if no compliant unit is available, provided the crew's reasonable request for an off-train facility is accommodated, which, on a single-track line in rural Nebraska, may mean waiting for a vehicle to drive out to the train. If you are finding this useful, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every week. Here is the specific question that the regulation actually answers, and that most people outside the railroad industry have never thought to ask. What happens when the toilet on a locomotive is found to be defective or unsanitary at the start of a shift? No compliant replacement unit is available at that location, and the railroad needs to send the crew out anyway. The law has a specific provision for this. The railroad can dispatch the locomotive, provided it arranges alternative sanitation access upon the crew's reasonable request, and provided the locomotive does not pass through a location where it could have been cleaned or repaired without being addressed. On a remote subdivision at 2 in the morning, what a reasonable request looks like in practice is a different question than what it looks like in a regulatory filing. And the answer to that question is part of what the BLET has been raising for years. Dennis Pierce, the longtime national president of the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, testified before Congress in 2022 about freight railroad working conditions. The BLET represents roughly 33,000 active engineers and conductors across North America. "I have never seen it this bad," Pierce said in 2022, referring to the scheduling environment and constraints his members faced daily. Locomotive sanitation was among the recurring grievances the union raised. Consider what that looks like in practice. A crew taking charge of a locomotive at 2 in the morning, discovering the sanitation compartment is unsanitary, the Modesty lock broken, the ventilation inoperable, and no replacement locomotive is available. Under 49 CFR 229.137, the railroad can send them anyway, provided it arranges alternative access upon reasonable request. On a remote subdivision at 2 a.m., what that request looks like in practice is a different question than what it looks like in a regulatory filing. What Pierce and the BLET were describing, and what the FRA survey had documented 2 decades earlier, is a situation in which the regulatory floor exists, but the experience on any given shift depends heavily on how well the specific locomotive has been maintained, what the railroad's actual servicing practices are, and where on the route the crew is when the question becomes relevant. A well-serviced GE Evolution Series locomotive leaving a major yard at the start of a shift is a different situation from the same locomotive type on hour 10 of a 12-hour run in a remote subdivision. The adaptation that crews developed long before any of this was regulated is the one the engineer in the Nebraska cab is practicing in the opening of this video. Experienced railroaders reduce their fluid intake before and during shifts. It is not official. It is not documented in any policy. It is transmitted the way most occupational knowledge is transmitted, by watching what the experienced people do and understanding why. The BLET has raised this as an occupational health concern in multiple labor proceedings, framing dehydration management over a multi-decade career as a compounding physical toll distinct from the acute discomfort of any single shift. The gap between the regulatory floor and the daily reality is where that concern lives. The Hours of Service Act limits freight crews to 12 consecutive hours on duty. After 12 hours, the clock stops and the crew cannot be contacted for a minimum period. This law, which this channel has covered in earlier videos, was written to prevent fatigue-related accidents. It has a secondary effect that is less often discussed. It eliminates any slack in the shift. In that context, a 45-minute unplanned stop is not a minor inconvenience. It consumes a significant fraction of the 12-hour operating window, occupies the main line, and drains the crew's duty clock. If it pushes them past their legal limit, the railroad must deadhead a relief crew to wherever the train is sitting, an expensive, time-consuming cascade from a single stop. The crew in Nebraska knows this calculation before they make any decision during a shift. They know which slow orders are coming up in the next 2 hours, which ones allow a brief stop without significant delay, and which segments of the route have no such opportunity. The dispatcher knows it too. The decision about the water bottle at hour 4 is partly about comfort and partly about math. And the math was already done before the shift began. The engineer in Nebraska finishes his shift at the terminal. He has been on duty for 11 hours and 40 minutes. The locomotive he has been running, a GE Evolution Series unit, one of the more modern cabs in the fleet, has a functional sanitation compartment. It was serviced at the start of the shift, which the daily inspection requirement under 49 CFR 229.21 mandates. He has used it twice during the shift, both times during planned slow orders where the train's speed was already reduced and the operational penalty of a brief stop was minimal. He drank about half of what he would normally drink during a day of comparable physical activity. Over a career measured in decades and hundreds of thousands of miles, that fraction adds up to a specific kind of occupational adjustment that nobody formally acknowledges and everybody informally makes.